like to thank Dr. the Honorable D. Orlando Smith and all of you in the room for the opportunity today to introduce the Bank of Asia to the Business BVI Forum. Can you hear me in the back? It's okay? Yep, thank you. I believe we're on the verge of a large-scale change in the financial services industry landscape. And I'd like to frame my comments to you today into three segments: our mission, our structure, and our future. First, let me start with our mission objectives. To serve BVI constituent financial service needs. We have been expressly formed at the request of the Premier to create value to British Virgin Island constituents and meet financial services needs. There are almost 500,000 companies incorporated with BVI certificates. You all know that. Some are incorporated by billionaires, entrepreneurs, professionals, business people, but it's the billionaires who are being served and most coveted by the large commercial banks. Many of the rest fall through the cracks. Unfortunately, for this other class of beneficial owners, they fall below the break-even net worth required for a big bank these days to pay attention. I've been a private banker for 25 years, mostly at Citibank, and over the course of that period of time, the break-even revenue required to service a client steadily has risen to where it sits today at about US dollars 50,000 per client. So a large money center bank, a large private bank that you'd be aware of, needs $50,000 of revenue from each client just to cover its costs in managing that client. Roughly, the industry earns about 50 basis points on assets under management, which means a client needs to have $10 million with a private bank in order for the private bank just to earn $50,000 and break even. They haven't even started to make money yet. So if you're able to deposit $10 million with your private bank, it means you're worth a multiple of 10 million, right? It doesn't include your businesses, your real estate, your, say, goodwill value, meaning you have to be a very, very high net worth individual, very ultra high net worth client to be the target market of a private bank today. Everyone else is left being, let's say, underserved. And we feel it's our opportunity to be able to address this segment of the market, which is both in number many, many more than the billionaires, but also in terms of need, we feel closer to the Bank of Asia opportunity to provide advice. So number one is we aim to serve our BVI beneficial owner constituents and open accounts for them and provide advice and products and services. Secondly, we aim to serve the BVI Islanders. Much of their economy is derived from financial services. We know that. The Premier knows that. And without the ability to open accounts for BVI companies, incorporations start to decline. And I think you've already seen that with incorporations falling from their peaks because of the difficulty of getting into the financial system. Doesn't really do you any good to have a BVI company if you can't bank and use the company for the purposes that you set it up for. So we aim to be able to help the BVI maintain its economy and perhaps even grow it even further. Thirdly, but not last, we're here to service the corporate service providers and partner with them to help their businesses to continue to grow and to continue to attract beneficial owners to incorporate new BVI companies. Once again, not being able to open a bank account makes it very difficult for a beneficial owner to choose the BVI to open a new company. So we feel like corporate service providers and law firms and accountants that service beneficial owners are a very good partner for us going forward. Secondly, our mission is to bank on a clean slate. I think we're all very familiar with the headline news of Deutsche Bank and Wells Fargo and Goldman Sachs, but that's just the news of this week. Next week there will be more, and last week there were other ones. The banking industry suffers from a lot of legacy judicial liability for misselling, for the deeds of their past, but they also suffer from legacy infrastructure. They've built 200,000 person behemoths to service their clients. And the cost of that infrastructure, whilst being very high, is also very, very hard to change overnight. Old banks are not able to move forward with the current times. Whereas for Bank of Asia, we start with a clean piece of paper. We are greenfield. We have no legacy legal issues. We have no legacy platforms and infrastructure that we need to write off or to change. We have what we know is a clean sheet of paper in order to build our new bank. So a clean slate is very much a part of our objective and mission. Thirdly, our objective is to take a digital leap forward. And what this means to us is to try to outsource and use technology to the greatest extent possible to keep our business human capital light and by nature as well, cost light. So what we have attempted to build would be more a forward-thinking bank, branchless, where all of your transactions would be able to be accomplished through handheld devices or a laptop or a digital means. I'm not sure any of us in this room like to go to a branch. We also don't think that that's a pleasant experience, and we hope to be able to create a bank that avoids having to go to a branch. So how are we going to do all this? Let me talk a little bit about our structure. As I mentioned, Bank of Asia was formed earlier this year at the request of the Premier. Since then, we have started to focus our efforts on the architecture of the platform. To start with, we don't want to create a 200,000 person bank. Unless the 200,000 replace the 20 million or so workforce in the current financial services industry that are employed by over 14,000 banks. But that's slightly more ambitious than where we think we are prepared to state right now. But what we are planning to do is to outsource our architecture to first-rate, globally significant, end-to-end back office processing. And much of the work that we've been doing to date has been around designing this platform and working with various service providers to contract with us to provide our back office platform. We also will use multiple regulator-certified KYC AML engines and try to provide a multi-dimensional approach to reviewing KYC and AML risks in the system. And a number of other things, like rather than incubating our own broker-dealer, we will use third-party broker-dealers that trade for pennies on the dollar. And our payments, FX, and money transfers will be offered at cost-plus rates. We'll link into the global ATM systems to provide debit card and cash access around the world. and hope to be, again, digitally proficient. So what is the difference, you asked, to Charles Schwab, Interactive Brokers, or E-Trade, or peer-to-peer transfers, or plain old money changers? We will offer the widest product range available, multi-jurisdictional in the G20 and APEC markets, and expanding later to the far-reaching corners of the world. Most of the competitors we know of today are limited to a single market. But even for those that aren't, we don't need to be the one and only bank in the world. We only need to displace some of the 14,000 banks that are trying helplessly to be a low-cost, efficient, ubiquitous solution, but aren't embracing technology in the fully automated sense, and therefore aren't up to the task. We hope to deliver this to you by the first quarter of 2017. So what will the future look like then? Account opening, we've heard it 1,000 times. Account opening is getting too hard to contemplate. We've built an online account opening system that we feel is leaps ahead of others in timeliness and accuracy of KYC. In all my years as a private banker, I learned well the risks associated with manual entry loopholes and conflicts of interest embedded in the old world way of doing KYC. Our technology leapfrogs the old manual interview system. We'll use a combination of biometrics, social media, digital fingerprints, location pinpoints, and the world of big data to eliminate human shortcomings. Whilst I'd love to share with you the details, I'm afraid, like the CIA, we have to keep some secrets on a need-to-know basis. Rest assured, though, we will be taking the Premier, who has security clearance, through the entire algorithm during lunch today following this session. We also envision a world of private banking that brings the superior ubiquity of electronically verified advice, organized and interpreted for the masses of emerging wealth who need advice most. I mentioned earlier that billionaires are well served. And by nature, they don't really need the advice, since it comes pouring out in droves. It's the lower high net worth that can benefit most, and we intend to build a platform combining human touch points with the scientific accuracy of technology to analyze client need, determine suitability and objectives, and implement real-time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week wealth management. Name me a private banker or private bank that doesn't sleep, take a holiday, and knows everything up to the minute. But if I ask you if you think Google knows the answer to most things, I guess you'd probably choose Google over me. We will deliver wealth management that combines the human elements that are so important to relationship with the accuracy of the electronic universe to bring you what we call the Wealth Management Advisory Platform, or Wealth MAP, M-A-P in short. Getting from point A to B most efficiently to self-direct your financial needs at a much lower cost will be as easy as entering your coordinates. All of this on top of meeting basic financial service necessities, including securities dealing, money payments, FX, global cash access, margin finance, deposits, and all the basic financial services needs. So let me conclude by prophesizing what may be ahead in the near future. Whilst we will focus squarely on delivering our promise to every BVI constituent, there's a big ocean of fish beyond, and we hope to expand to other offshore incorporation jurisdictions and their beneficial owners. And we hope that our superior product and service, delivered in digital efficiency, will attract scalability and adoption to a far greater population of emerging wealth around the world that will eventually make the Bank of Asia the bank of the future. I thank you very much for your attention and time. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Rizal.
Just to pick up on the account opening.
Yes.
You mentioned that you're going to try and help facilitate clients open accounts that may have been rejected by another bank, let's say an HSBC. Does that mean that your KYC procedures are more relaxed than other banks?
Certainly not more relaxed. In fact, we think perhaps triple in due diligence efficiency. The ones that are getting turned away by other banks may not be because they have something that they've done wrong. We think a lot of babies get thrown out with the bathwater, and it's those that we want to capture. We certainly don't want to deal with anyone who is suspicious or doing things that are flaunting the financial services system. But we do think that there are a lot who aren't being served because they're lumped into the bucket of being a BVI company. Martin.
Wayne, on the account opening, we talk about BVI having to be as easy to deal with as possible, and hopefully your bank will be easy also. But we in our industry are also investing in IT systems, platforms for clients to self-use and so on. Would there be any prospect of us having an electronic link between our portals, I would say, and your KYC portal, so that we avoid sort of human interaction in copies of documents and ferrying, people around and that sort of thing?
That's absolutely our intent, and the research that we've done so far with third-party service providers is that there is a system to link, and it's really more about us partnering and organizing that linkage and having a third party do extra due diligence for us. But we think that's very much in the realm of possibility and very much in the realm of our plans to work with all the corporate service providers to create efficiency.
Great, thank you.
Please.
Mr. Wu. This is more of a comment rather than a question. I was just,
Please.
You said something, and I was really happy to hear that you said that, which is you didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I find that sometimes there are a lot of compliance officers with banks and other agencies where they sometimes take a knee-jerk approach instead of thinking things out properly and clearly. And I've had a situation with, it was actually, it was an investment company, and they offered investment services to clients, and the compliance officer needed verification of an address, and the situation was, and this wasn't in the BVI, thankfully, because I'm sure most of the compliance officers there would be familiar with the situation that not everyone has a physical street address. And the situation was that the compliance officer was not able to understand that concept, and they refused accepting a sworn notarized affidavit of address, which a sworn affidavit is actually also a document that's accepted in the courts as evidence, and they lost that business. So I think it's good to have compliance officers in your association, your bank, sorry, where they think, and it's not about a knee-jerk reaction, or they don't think outside of the box. So it's good to know that you have that approach, and I think many clients would be happy to know that. And it's not about being lax in any way at all. It's actually thinking, and that requires more work than a knee-jerk approach. So I'm happy to hear that.
Right. Well, one of our main observations in the existing banking system is that it's kind of single-dimensional. To open an account, you need an address proof and an ID. But that's it, just two things. So if the entire industry relies on doing KYC due diligence on two dimensions, just an address proof and an ID, then of course they're focused a lot of their attention on making sure those are right. But there are many, many more dimensions to who we are and what our backgrounds are and who we are as a client. So Bank of Asia will endeavor to be much more multidimensional in its exploration of KYC. Things like Facebook pages, things like biometrics, things like your iris and your voice scan, many other ways to prove somebody's identity and prove where they came from than just what their address is. Because an address, even if it were to be verified, can be changed overnight, right? I mean, we can all send a piece of mail to one address and move somewhere the next day. So I don't think an address proof necessarily does all the work, but that's what the regulators expect today. We hope we can think far beyond that. Please.
Firstly, let me sort of congratulate you on the progress made to date, and I think the industry is very excited about this initiative. Your business model is relying on convergence of technology and financial services, yeah? And my question is a little bit of an extension of the previous comment, which is at the point of time when you will be onboarding a new client, can we expect that the ultimate decision is made by an individual, i.e. a compliance officer, or will this be more tech-driven? So it's a combination of sort of algorithms that says, okay, yes or no. So which kind of direction can we expect to see?
Well, we intend to do 90% of our due diligence using electronic means, technology. But that 90% probably covers like 50% of what an existing bank is able to do. So we will be almost double in due diligence background information before a human gets involved. But we do recognize the element of experience and, let's say, the sniff test in doing KYC and eventually in approving new accounts. But that will be a default from much better information gathering than a default from a compliance officer saying, oh, this just doesn't look right to me and I can't give you many reasons why or why not, but I say no. So we want to be more grounded in the decision-making process, and we want to use technology to give us a better profile before we have to make a decision.
Recently in my discussions with one of the banks with regard to scenarios as to why they would reject opening an account or onboarding a client, they gave an example of somebody who wanted to start a restaurant and had no history or no history of being in the restaurant business. And that was, of course, there was a combination of reasons, but that was one of the reasons for rejecting this account. What is your response to that in terms of, because a lot of people get into businesses that they don't necessarily have experience or can't provide that experience to a bank. So what is your response to that, and how would you handle that scenario?
Well, it seems to me everyone has to take a first step at some point in their lives, and that's where innovation arises from, right? Is when people try new things. So I can't say we would be necessarily supportive or unsupportive, because that person's background is going to be key to why they got into the restaurant business. And it's more about us doing the correct investigation of their past than just determining that because they're starting a new business, and restaurants are cash intensive, and so they are on the high risk list for businesses that banks commonly refer to. But that in itself is not a reason to prejudice a decision against a restaurant entrepreneur. I think where we would default to is trying to do a better job at understanding exactly who our customer is, rather than making preformed decisions based on just a list. Please, Joseph.
It appears that Bank of Asia is in the cutting edge of being an innovator and being a disruptive innovator at that, it is very difficult for incumbents, i.e. the big banks with 200,000 people each, to compete effectively with an innovator like you. However, when you look at the potential competitors, would you think that some of the companies that are also able to start with a clean slate, like some of the internet companies from China, for instance, they may know their customers very well too, and they may also have the wherewithal to check the background and so on, and their financial resources. So how would you compete against these potential entrants?
Well, we look at them as inspirational examples of what can be done in financial technology. And the world is pretty big. There are 14,000 banks in the world today. So if we take, say, Alipay and Baidu and WeChat and Tencent Bank and the ones that are existing that you think of in your mind when we think of the industry leaders, that's 3. But 3, I doubt, are going to displace 14,000 existing financial institutions. So we kind of think if we're in that first mover, in the first 100 or the first 1,000 banks and institutions that are able to offer these type of forward-thinking services, that will already be a very effective participant in the community. Having said that, our express primary objective is the BVI and BVI constituents. And so if BVI companies can't go or don't go to those companies that you think of to have a wide range of services internationally with a bank that will welcome them, then we may have a competitive advantage there on top.
Hi, yes, very exciting initiative. I welcome what the other people have said, but I think coming at it from the other side, the previous panel talked about the brand of BVI. Well, I think brand is equally important for banks. So when the client is saying, well, how safe will my money be, particularly when you're talking about trustees who are very conservative for obvious reasons, you know, obviously you'll need a certain amount of regulatory capital, but I think, if I remember, that's only about 2 million or something in BVI. I mean, what sort of credit rating will you get, or those sorts of things that trustees or users of the bank will be interested in?
Right, thank you. It's a very good question. We recognize that as a new entrant, there is a challenge, uphill challenge, to establishing credibility. But as such, we intend to raise many times the multiple of $2 million of capital that you mentioned. And I'm afraid I can't disclose that quite yet. But if you talk to some of your peers in the BVI, they may tell you what they've heard. Our number is far greater. But that's not going to be the only answer, right? It's also going to be what risks that we take with the balance sheet. And from day one, the lending policy, the lending strategy is to stay with margin finance, financing clients' positions in securities, which tends to be a little bit of a lower risk lending activity than, say, credit cards or corporate banking or mortgages. So you can break it down both into the asset book and the capital. In terms of having a credit rating, we may be too small in the near term to go and seek a S&P or Moody's credit rating. And I don't think we'll necessarily go into the markets for short, mid, and long-term capital market financing that would require more of a credit rating analysis. But in the long term, that's entirely possible. And we chose the name Bank of Asia and the link to the BVI to try to establish supranational supranational coverage. So Bank of Asia, we know we have to build it. We know that there's a lot to do, but that's what we're here to try to build. Anything else? Please.
the client. That means if a client from Europe, he doesn't need to make a special trip to your place to meet with your officer to open the bank account.
Our intent is to be able to make our system wealth management, say, for dummies, in that you would be able to fully operate, fully utilize all the advice and the direction on an automated basis without having ever to talk to a person. But we recognize that a lot of wealth management is relationship driven, and that people like to have a human relationship manager to talk to. So we will build a sales force as well, more, I think, for the social or conversational elements of what you consider private banking to be, than for advice. And the reason is very important is because we want to maintain the quality and the consistency of the advice, which we feel electronically is much more easier to control than by having 100 private bankers provide 100 different opinions from whatever their perspective is. So we'll separate advice from relationship management, and our sales team will be there in order to handhold or guide through either the system or through people's needs, identifying their needs. But the system will be there to handle all the implementation, execution, analysis, and keep it real time, because it's awake all the time. But in terms of mandatory meeting or having a meeting with a relationship manager, I'm not sure we've come to an answer for that yet, but we would like to avoid that as much as possible because it helps us in our scalability. Okay? All right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. Me and my colleagues will be around all afternoon, and so please feel free to approach us. We're very happy to discuss with you any other further questions or comments that you may have. Thank you.